Service Lab is a community of service design doers and the service design curious. We meet up every few months to share our learnings with each other. Welcome everyone to Service Lab. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Really excited for this event, so we're going to tell you a little bit more about what to expect. As a little bit of a recap though, for anyone that hasn't been to Service Lab before, Service Lab is a space for practitioners to share experiences with each other, inspire each other and learn new things. We're a real mix of people. There's user researchers, there's service designers, I think there's a few policy designers, but there's a few kind of design curious. Everyone's welcome though. What we normally do is we kind of bring these various disciplines together to share learnings, case studies and practical tools. We've had events in the past about policy design, behavioural design, healthcare design, designing inclusively, and much, much more. And we're always looking for recommendations as well. So if there's anything that you really want to learn more about, drop us a message and we'll see whether we can pull together an event based on that. It's really informal as a space and an event, camera on or off, whatever you prefer. We welcome everyone, so feel free to attend whatever the location, situation, whether you're eating, cleaning, still doing a bit of work, got a little one with you or a curious cat that wants some attention. We also always try to make sure that this is an accessible and inclusive event. So if there's anything that you notice or is there anything that we can do to make this experience better for everyone, please do let us know. A little introduction to the organisers behind the event. So Service Lab was started quite a few years ago now by Rupert and Jenny. Rupert is still kind of lurking around in the background. I have been supporting Service Lab as an organiser for a couple of years now. I'll do a little introduction to myself and then you might notice that there's some new faces on the screen as well, so we can do a little bit of an update. But just to introduce myself, my name is Charlie Pothickery. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a freelance service designer and user researcher with a focus on designing inclusive services. I started a small kind of agency, mainly me, called Inclusively. I mainly work across the public sector, social enterprises and healthcare. And a little visual description of myself as well. I'm a white woman with medium length brown hair. I'm currently sat in a room with quite a few plants and I'm wearing a very bright orange top. I will pass over in a second to the other co-organisers. But as you can see, there's a few new faces on the screen. So we have new co-organisers, Best and Charlotte, who are going to do an introduction to themselves in a second. But what this means is that sadly we're saying goodbye to Otler and Katrina. Otler and Katrina have been doing a fantastic job bringing lots of different events to you over the last couple of years, but they've moved on to kind of some different things. And now we have Best and Charlotte. Also, as a shout out, though, if anyone is ever interested in getting involved as a co-organizer, we'd absolutely love it. We all do this kind of on top of various other things. It's all a bit of a kind of labour of love, but we're always looking for further support. But without further ado, I will pass over to Best to do a bit of an introduction to themselves. Oh, to Charlotte even.
I'll go. Hi everyone, I'm new to the Service Lab team, so I'm sitting here in my little office. I've got like a jazzy poster behind me and a bookshelf. I'm white, my pronouns are she and her. I've got brown short hair and then I've got a big cozy jumper on. So I've previously spoken at Service Lab on evaluating digital health products and on CALDA, the LGBTQIA+ mental wellbeing app, which I co-founded. I love improving services, creating a positive impact for people. My areas of interest at the moment are health and food. So stay in touch. You can follow me on LinkedIn or add me on LinkedIn, but also there's a lot of pals in the audience. So it's good to see you. And yeah, I'll pass over to Best.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Best. I'm from Thailand, and just a little bit of the visual description. I'm a Southeast Asian woman with black hair and currently wearing a blue sweater. And I'm sitting in my flat with the background of capybaras and meerkat portraits. So a little bit about me. I'm a service designer and I just started my journey in a local government here in London after completing my MA service design from University of the Arts. Yeah, I'm very excited to apply my skills and knowledge towards creating meaningful change through design, especially in public policy and education. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here at this event organizing with the amazing team.
Thanks so much, both. I'm sure there's a big round of applause digitally coming from everyone else. So thanks for being on board. Just a little note to everyone, we'll be doing a few kind of like tweets here and there. Please do kind of tweet if there's anything that you feel like should be shared wider with other people that people can learn from. We're also recording this event. If you don't want to be in the recording, make sure that you've got your camera off and kind of change your name to something anonymous. The recording will be kind of edited together and then put onto our YouTube channel. We've got quite a few previous events up there now. This one will be up in a couple of weeks' time as well. So take a look and please share with anyone that you know maybe that couldn't make it along at this time so that we can ensure as many people as possible can learn from our brilliant speakers this evening. A few community asks. We would love to do some in-person events again. It's quite difficult finding in-person event spaces. We're ideally looking for spaces that have at least kind of 60 people and are accessible. If anyone wants to lend us an event space, we would absolutely love it. So please do reach out. As always, if anyone wants to give a talk, please reach out. If anyone's got a topic suggestion or wants to nominate someone else to talk, again, please reach out. We are here for you and we want to try and make this as useful as possible as an event space for everyone. Okay, so on to the main thing, a little bit of an introduction to designing for people and the planet. So as you can see, we've got 3 brilliant speakers lined up. They're going to be focusing in particular on talking about their journeys transitioning to focus solely on climate and social impact work. They're also going to be talking about how to design for transformative adaptation and resilience. And they'll also be talking a little bit about how to design for net zero local policies and services. This is an area that's dear to most of our hearts, I'm sure. So there'll be lots of key takeaways and things that you'll be able to put in your toolbox. Here's the agenda. So we are going to first hear from Lara. So it'll be kind of around 10-minute talk and then kind of 5 minutes for questions. Then we're going to hear from Joshua and then we'll hear from Lilli and then we'll do a quick wrap up and some thank yous as well. I'll now hand over to Best, who's going to do an introduction for Lara.
Lara is actually my tutor from UIL, and she is currently a senior lecturer at UIL. Lara has a decade of experience in design for public interest services and policies. Her expertise includes multi-sector and multidisciplinary collaborations, and she shares her experience of embedding design in local authorities to support net zero local policies and services through the Climate Studio initiative in London. Lara will provide some of the examples and methods to illustrate her collaborative practice. So yeah, over to you, Lara.
Thank you, Best. Thanks a lot. And my laptop broke this morning, so that's why they have my slides and they will be very kindly handling them. So my name is Lara, and the visual description. So I'm a very short, mid-aged woman, mixed background, sitting in my bedroom where I have my home office, wearing a very colorful jumper that my mom made, and it's very cool. And I'm gonna talk to you today about my experience designing for public sector innovation, and in particular working on trying to encourage and promote place-based climate action. I'm going to keep an eye on the timer because I know we're a bit behind, so I'll try to make it shorter if I can. And I'm a design practice researcher and an educator, which means that I might be a bit an odd one here among this crowd. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. I am the co-director of the Service Futures Lab, which is a group of people that work in London College of Communication, and we together work with organizations that deliver public services, and we try to help them deliver them better. That's in a very simple terms. on the areas of public health, climate emergency, and policy. And since we are in a design university, one characteristics of how we work is that we always involve our MA students in everything we do. Therefore, the work I'm about to present, I have to say, is co-produced with students, with doctoral researchers, and of course, with different public organizations and public servants. Next, please. Thank you. So before we actually start, I just wanted to very briefly talk a bit about what do we do as academics and designers and practitioners, educators, right, researchers, like what's our role? Because it's something we think a lot and try to be very critical about what's our role in all of this ecosystem. So I wanted to say that as academics, we believe that we're educating, right, in the master. So we're trying to train designers like best are prepared and driven to work in public sector. So that's one of the functions that I believe we do. When we work with public sector organizations, quite often is the first time they've worked with a designer, and they do it because they see us and the university as being very friendly, cheaper, right, working with students. So it's like a friendly space. And we believe that we do a lot of design advocacy there, getting other people who haven't worked with designers know about it. And that also leads us to create spaces where we can experiment a bit better. So you are all familiar with how the public sector is systematically under-resourced. And that means that they don't have capacity they cannot afford to experiment and to play around. And that's something that I believe we bring. Which is very important because we know that climate emergency, sustainability are very complex challenges that we are not going to solve unless we try to do things differently, which is very much what I'm going to talk about now. So next, please. Thank you. So back in about 2019 or so, we started to collaborate with the London Borough of Sadok. That, for those of you who might not be familiar with it, is a borough of about 300,000 inhabitants in the south of London, and quite diverse, a bit younger than average. And when we were working with them, we've been working with especially the climate emergency department. And our interest in this collaboration wasn't so much about designing services itself, really, that would lead to reduce carbon emissions, but really to understand how they were working and help them tackle the whole work, the whole immense task of reducing carbon emissions in this borough in a different way, enabled by design with a different perspective. So this diagram, I always use it. So I know that some people in the audience know me, so maybe you've seen this already. We created this a few years ago to explain how designers work and how people in local governments actually also work. So you can identify kind of the different stages of a design process, kind of a double diamond process: discover, define, develop, deliver. We're familiar with those, but then you can also see a first layer of decision makers, which is much more kind of political, when we vote and we get one party or the other in power, and then they start to assess what's going on, and they start to identify the different policy objectives, and that's the space that we identify with design for policy. And then once the objectives have been and the targets have been decided and the problems on what has been identified, we'll go into the solution space that is typically the one for service designers. So as probably you've experienced, often we get the brief wrong, right? After the problem has been identified in a way that really closes a lot of opportunities. So what we were thinking, we've been thinking quite a lot, is how can we try to, we need to be present all the way through, try to do things in a different way, but often we're only called for that final part, right? So how do we change this? Can I have the next one, please? So back in 2019, as I was saying, we started to work with Sadok Council, and the first thing we did was to unpack their climate emergency strategy. So you can think of a lot of very thick and complex documents, and we started to visualize them. Can I have the next one, please? And we ended up producing something like this that looks very simple, but it actually took about 3 months of research and analysis. And what you have here, it's very significative, because you have all the 150 actions that a given local authority, in this case SADC, agreed to deliver, categorized, as you can see on the top, on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different strategic areas. And then you can see another layer with about 26 objectives, targets, and then all these actions go to one or to the other. And then at the very bottom, you have everyone inside the local authority. So we are assigning the different tasks to people. And then there is a tiny layer under kind of the second one, where you have a few people floating. So those were the external stakeholders that they had already identified. So looking at this map, we learned a couple of things that were very important for us. So for example, is that one challenge or one objective, it's in a way defined by assigning it to a team. So for example, if we talk about sustainable diets and you give sustainable diets to public health, that is already a problem of public health and not a problem of urbanism and gentrification, for example, right? So that was one. The other one was that one about the stakeholders. It's like, if a local authority doesn't really produce many of the carbon emissions, they only produce about 50% of them. 85 are produced by other people. You need to be working with other people. So how are you engaging them? What are your strategy? What's your plan? And that knowledge was held by small teams, but not centrally, and it wasn't really coordinated. And then the other one was that the density in the lines really tell us what they are prioritizing, right? And it was all to do about things that they have in close control and things that are very measurable, because they need to deliver on measurable objectives. So that also allowed us to decide on what to focus on, what not. Can I have the next one, please? So these were the challenges that we were tackling, which is how can we involve other people, right, in trying to achieve this, but also how do we get the local authority to experiment when it's so difficult for them? Can I have the next one, please? So we came up with something that now we call critical service design, and in very brief and very simple terms, we are designing with citizens, with residents, with all sorts of people, services that will exist in a future that is carbon neutral. And then we're going to learn from these futures. We're going to experience these futures and see what we think about them. And if we like them, if we think that they are preferable, that are better, we're going to do a backcasting, and we are going to see which steps we need to start taking now to attain those preferable futures. And I'll give you some examples, and that'll be my talk. Can I have the next one, please? Yeah, I'm going to skip that very quickly. So just so that you have a sense of the volume of work and the resources it took, we delivered a piece of work over about 4 months that included 3 design graduates, but also 30 postgraduate students, local government, and 4 different organizations that brought out their communities. So we engaged with about 100 people and managed to inform local policy in the world. Next, please. And these are some of the examples that we got. So these are produced by children of the borough, age 6 to 7, 8. And on the left-hand side, you have that balloon with eyes and the mustache that was very upset. And when we talked to the child that did this, she was talking about how it was very easy to do the wrong thing, and there was no police, no one to enforce doing the right thing. So then we, second stage, is kind of repackage that a tiny bit and then present it back to different communities so that we can kind of do a create on the idea and learn from it. On the right-hand side, you have another example of a shared compost machine. The whole story was like, all these processes are hidden from us, you know, and I'm very neat and sleek, and actually we should make them visible, and we should make them part of our everyday life. And here you have an example of people saying, well, what about vandalism, or who's going to run it? And those are really well informed and also simple questions that are very informative for a local authority. Can I have I'm going to skip the next one because of the time. I've asked the organizers to please share a link to the slides, and here you have some more videos and blog posts and stuff that you can check if you want to know more about that. And that was me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Lara. That was very interesting. How, you know, like looking from the policy is not just like on the top view, but actually you really engage with the residents from like even like younger age. I think that's like very interesting, and looking at all the artworks that they have done. Yeah, that's very great. So yeah, this is a time for the questions. We have one. Yeah, by the way, the people are thinking that your maps are impressive. So very simple, isn't it? So yeah, regarding the map, just quick question: what tool did you use to make the map?
Sure. So we used Miro, and we created it iteratively because the way in which we visualize it really mattered. And then we thought that it wasn't that legible, so we hired a visualizer, a professional one, to do that in Illustrator, I think she used. And actually, I'm not too sure which version I like best. Because the Miro one feels like it's in progress, and it should feel in progress because it's not finished, and the other one is too static. So what we're looking at the moment is for a company that wants to develop it. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Okay. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, we have a question from Joshua. What are some of the ways you would recommend getting into policy design or influencing policy from where you are currently working?
Sure. So for me, it's very important trust and respect, and really, I think there is a real fear when we work with local authorities that they don't want to become too dependent on us. They are the ones that are responsible for delivering the work, and they need to still be in control. So we always approach them in a very humble way, starting with very small things that we can deliver in a very easy way, minimizing the risk, and bringing them to see the process. I think that's also very important. So it's like all respect for the profession, not going with a designer that's going to save the day and teach them how to do their job, right? And then to really open it up the process you do, so that they can see that some things are not so dissimilar to what they do and can relate and adopt those.
Mm-hmm. Collaborative is the key. Thank you. We have a hand from Millie. Would you want to turn the mic on and ask Lara?
If that's okay, I'm trying to type on a mobile. Yeah, so I'm really interested in the travel side of things. I've got an interest in that. And I'm in London too. And in my local authority, there's a lot of differences of opinion on things like active travel and low traffic neighborhoods. And I guess it's just around, how did you manage including all the voices, and how did you manage to come to a consensus around that? Because I know it's you know, quite a difficult topic, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. So I think it's a very good question, because that's one of the reasons why in my experience, sometimes the local authorities are afraid or more scared, right, of doing a proper consultation or engagement, because it's like opening a Pandora box where no one is going to agree, right? And you can't really afford to do that. So in this case, we ran away from that directly. Because we couldn't afford that. So we are still in a process of, or we were in a process of getting to know each other, and we went to work on food because we thought it was easier and was less loaded than transport, for example. Yep. And then about consensus, I don't think we ever reach consensus. I don't know if that answers, but yeah, it never reaches. But that's why in this case, in the example of Climate Studio that I shared, we decided to go with food. And I, on purpose, we said we were not going to go to anything of urban planning or building, because there are different disciplines that are much more political and much more loaded.
All right. I think we have time for only one last question. So yeah, this question, What were your client partners at Southern Council expecting from you? Did they understand what they were going to get? And did they understand it when you delivered what you started to show us just now?
That's a very, very good question. They had no idea at the beginning. And on top of it, we didn't even do graphic design or anything, but we did speculative critical design, which is kind of the hardest to get, right? So it was a very big leap of faith that they did there. That's why I was talking about transparency and bringing them into the process. They did get it afterwards. We continued working. We're still working together. Now we have research together. So they eventually got it. And I have to say now some of them really talk like as if they were designers. They kind of got their mini degree working with us. But that's what I was saying, that from the position of the university, I think it's easier to really get your foot into some of these sometimes.
All right. Okay, thank you, Lara. And I think it's time for the next speaker.
Yes, so I wanted to take a second to introduce Joshua. So we are actually part of the same blog club together, and I've really enjoyed hearing snippets of what Joshua's been working on in the climate space. He's got 10 years of experience. He's focused on developing climate solutions and transforming business models. And he's going to talk about his journey into regenerative design, which I think you're going to find really, really juicy. So I will hand right over to Joshua to share his screen and start his talk.
Hello, thank you so much for that kind introduction and amazing talk, Lara. I definitely want to connect with you more after hearing all about that. I shared the link to my slides in the chat, so you can also follow along in Figma. And then the first thing, there's another link I'm just going to share, which is a Mentimeter. I haven't used this in a while, so bear with me to see if I actually work out how it works. But there's a couple of questions in there. What you can do quickly is either scan this QR code or go to Menti and type in the code. And yeah, there's a link in the chat as well. So I have two quick questions just to get a sense check from who we have in the audience and like general feelings. Great, already some answers in there. So the first one is, what kind of work are you in? So majority is like full-time, part-time, a bunch of freelancers, few students, few people not working. Cool. Great. Okay, I'll stop there. And then the next one is, how do you feel about the climate job market? Disheartened, somewhere in the middle, overwhelmed? I knew I shouldn't have given that middle option. But it's always a bit of a mix. But interesting to see like more people feeling disheartened and or somewhere in the middle. So hopefully, you know, maybe we'll see some changes. Maybe we can reflect on that afterwards at the end. So I'll just stop the voting there. That's useful context. So yes, I will quickly go through my kind of journey into regenerative design, and I would definitely stress the word journey because it's for sure ongoing, and I would say I'm quite early stages. But since I'll go into a bit more of my journey, how I got there, but where I'm at now, a few quick snapshots of the type of projects that I've been working on. So quite a range of things, from volunteering work on climate, helping doing like ecosystem research, to helping a corporate donation platform, to invest in startups and ventures in sub-Saharan Africa and focused on green jobs, to working with the Oatly Futures Lab, sustainable shopping platform, and a bunch of other stuff here, quite a range of different things. So hopefully it gives you a bit of a snapshot of all the types of, hopefully abundance of work you can do within the climate and social space. And to kind of give you a bit of context about where I came from. So I started my journey as designer in industrial design. So a lot around designing physical products. I was working at a suitcase, like luggage consultancy at one point. I was studied this at university as well. And I transitioned into UX design at that time. And one of the drivers, it was maybe one first point around sustainability. I thought there was just a lot of the jobs in the industrial design space were just like pointless stuff that the world doesn't need more of. So I was kind of a bit put off by a lot of the opportunities there. And I thought, like, while I wasn't super keen on like what I thought was like web design, having had like one Flash website that I built at uni, I got into that through an internship, and it turned into service design, and I like really enjoyed it. So that was kind of where my journey led me. And I think actually having a chat with a former colleague the other day, at that time, I thought also digital had a lower footprint. Definitely, there's a lot more nuance to that these days. And since then, I moved into the startup world in like 2018, moved to Berlin, and kind of gave that a try, designing lots of different kinds of products, but all centered around helping people become better leaders, and went into the world of like product market fit and viral growth and all of the venture capital world, as with its, you know, warts and all. And in end of 2021, I actually left that job. There was a few different things that led to that, which I'm happy to answer questions about. But essentially, I kind of just was seeing lots of news, lots of things that were making me pretty anxious. I also had a bit of a stint in New York at the start of 2020, where I was actually already considering sustainability and like thought that like it's a good place to see how big the problem is, like stepping into like Times Square and seeing all of the consumerism and how meeting people who are working on that kind of stuff. And it's also sort of coincided with a few changes in the company as well that meant I kind of, it was a good time to transition out. And I basically then made the leap and trying to just immerse myself in the space as much as I could. I didn't actually know at that time whether it would be something for me. I thought, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to learn as much as I can. Maybe I'm just jumping on the bandwagon because like it seems like everyone seems to care about this stuff, and I might turn out that I'm not actually interested. But hopefully you can see I still am. But yeah, this is kind of journey, a bit of a roller coaster. I left the job. I did a bit of a sort of lifestyle overhaul. I'll go into a few more details about these, but started volunteering at Work on Climate to kind of immerse myself a little bit more. Discovered a few local communities taking action, started getting involved in a regenerative farm near me as well. And I took this TerraDo course, which kind of immersed me in the whole landscape of it, a 12-week kind of community-driven course. Sort of exposed myself and rediscovered lots of different identities along the way, and like just sort of dropped my past self and, you know, rediscovered being an artist and all of this stuff. And then at some point I thought I probably should start actually working, and I registered as a freelancer. I thought, considering all of the networking and like learning I'd been doing, I thought there would be opportunities coming inbound like straight away. And you can see it wasn't quite that way, and definitely takes a little while to get going freelancing. It's quite a different world to job hunting as a full-time employee, and I had quite a few opportunities there, but freelance less so. And so in August, I got my first freelance gig. Then, you know, it was a struggle in the winter with lots of work dropping off and being postponed. And now, like, since this year, I've actually got lots of work, and too much to handle, to be honest. So it's kind of going into that. I think anyone who's freelancing and especially starting out, like this sort of roller coaster and balancing like this sustained workload. I'm going to have to speed up. I'm going too slowly, but a few things. You can check out the links. Where I started, I wanted to just be a good role model. I thought if I'm going to get into climate work, I should first try to change my own behavior and do as much as I can to take action in my own life. So I did a few things there, and I published like how I went about that. And that was kind of the start of my journey about also learning in public, which I think is probably a little bit about how Charlotte probably discovered me, and posting quite a lot on LinkedIn. Yeah, work on climate. This was also a really good way to expose myself to lots of different things. And as part of this overall role, leading the research team there, I also interviewed 20 job seekers in various different spaces for an hour each. So I really got immersed in all the types of different jobs and what the challenges were to finding work in that area. And I'm in the process of writing all of that up right now. But lots of interesting stuff going on there. And then I also did the TerraDo course, which you can find out a bit more about my reflections on that and what I learned. But that gave me a really good foundation. And I definitely would highly recommend it. But the main thing I guess I would take away is that I felt much more confident to step into any kind of climate work. Of course, there's always loads of stuff to do. But I think now reflecting back, like a lot of these projects that I'm doing now, I'm learning loads of stuff on the go. So you don't need to necessarily like really build up all of this foundational knowledge. But for me, it gave me a lot of confidence that I'm like doing things differently than I did before, and also not perpetuating some of the problems that I might have done having not had this kind of education as well. And I also like did an art exhibition as well, based off something I wrote in TerraDo, which I turned into an installation. And yeah, also trying to get hands-on experience as well. So into like regenerative farming space, there's a local farm I go to and help out, and super rewarding and fulfilling. It's like, you know, I think one of the things that I find in getting into this space is that sometimes the kind of most impactful things that you can do don't have the tangible feeling, or like the impact is like lagging behind. So while working on this farm may not be like super big scale, it does give me the sort of tangible, rewarding feel, and also sort of hands-on experience about what it's like to try and like do farming in a different way, which is something I'm really passionate about. So moving on to like how I actually found opportunities and how I sort of started out this process. Like before I joined the startup, I actually did this process of like evaluating the different values I had. So I set up, I've revisited this, but you can see the original blog post where I wrote about it, basically writing down like what motivates me, what's important to me, what do I want to avoid in my next role, and basically map them out and kind of score how important they are to you. And then when you come up against new opportunities, you can like match them against that through the research that you do and interviews you're doing. The actual impact level is pretty hard to investigate. So I had questions about how do you actually find out whether a company is actually principled and having integrity towards their sustainable actions. So there's a big resource there, which I crowdsourced from my own questions and other people about like, what can you do to investigate whether like the thing that you're supposed to be having impact on is actually having impact, whether it's like a climate focused company versus like a bigger company that's trying to change and transform. I think nowadays, I think this process is a little bit too heavy for like evaluating freelance contracts. So I've simplified it a little bit and just set up like 3 kind of ways to evaluate opportunities. So what are my non-negotiables? That has to have some sort of climate and social impact. And then there's a bunch of should have things, and then nice to have options as well. And that's a bit of a quicker process, just to make sure I'm kind of aligned with my values. getting started in freelancing, I just tried as many different things as I could. There's some things which like work generally, like referrals and what kind of going to your friends and family, nurturing existing clients. But there's a bunch of other stuff that you can try out. So one of the things I tried, which got me lots of opportunities actually, is I tried giving away like a free UX audit to climate focused companies and advertised it on LinkedIn. And that generated quite a few new leads. And then at least one of them turned into a paid contract as well. So like basically every week I try a different experiment, as well as amplifying the things that are working well already. So you can have a look at that. There's actually this guide from Jamie Brindle, who's really amazing, posting content about getting started freelancing. And he's got this good ebook that goes into some of the strategies you can use. And then lastly, yeah, the main thing I think taking away is like actually embedding regeneration into like my process. So I kind of came across this idea of regenerative relationships where the people you're collaborating with, you develop like a positive loop, you know, that the more you collaborate, the more energy and opportunities come from it. So few of the people that I think I've formed regenerative relationships with, I think a couple in the audience, where, you know, every conversation is always loads of things come out of it. And kind of to support this process, I have kept like a database. So every time I post something on LinkedIn, I can have a look at like who's interested in it and like tag them and all of this stuff. And where I'm at now is trying to actually balance this kind of influence level that I have. So balancing what I can control and not getting too anxious about the things outside of my influence, but again, sort of starting to influence things outside of just design. So one of the areas I'm exploring is like business models and metrics. So this one that Lennart Overkamp has produced is like actually adding sustainability, equitability, and health into your kind of standard metric alongside like desirability, feasibility, and viability. And that's it. I think I've gone way over time, but thanks so much for listening, and hopefully that was helpful.
That was absolutely brilliant. Lots of people are clapping. Yeah, thank you for being so open and honest. You know, you were sharing things that were very much your personal notion and your personal process. So that was really, really amazing to see. Are there any questions in the side chat? Lara wants to connect with you. And so there's an interesting question. In your UI UX work, are your outputs also sustainable, i.e. do they have a focus on saving energy, inclusive, etc.? And if so, how did you upskill in this area?
Yeah, good question. So I have to admit this is an area that I need to upskill on, and there's plenty of people way better than me who are writing a lot, producing videos on this. So there's a thing called the Green Web Foundation that produce a lot of really good content on that. I can share a few links in the chat when I finish, but most of my process so far has actually been like filtering the kind of companies like earlier in the funnel. So the overall purpose of the company is towards sustainability and social impact. I think there is definitely work I can do. Like right now I'm working with this like sustainable e-commerce platform, which is probably the footprint of that, if it's not designed well, could be much bigger than it needs to be. So this is something I actually want to learn. So Mariana, if you have also this same ambition, we can learn together if you like.
Awesome, that is brilliant. I'm sure there are more questions, and I know I have some, but our timekeeping hasn't been completely on point for this particular service lab, so forgive us. So I'm going to pass right over to Best, who's going to introduce Lilli. And once again, thank you so much, Joshua, for your awesome talk.
Yay. Here comes slides, and we are now at our last speaker, Lilli. So Lilli Graf is a service design consultant and founder of IMMA Collective. She helps businesses create profitable and resilient services, and she believes in making the world a better place while earning a living. So in her talk, she'll be discussing about the importance of designing for resilience in a changing world and provide practical advice for service designers and how to incorporate that into your work. Yeah, so over to you, Lilli.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm going to share my screen. But in the meantime, I can give you a visual description of me. So I'm a white woman with blonde hair and glasses, and I'm sitting here in my flat in Verona, Italy, sipping some ginger tea. So I want to share a couple of ideas on how we can design for resilience and help people and organizations thrive in uncertainty and under adversity. And a little bit about me. I'm Lilli. I grew up on a remote mountain farm in the Italian Alps, and somehow I ended up at the opposite end of the spectrum and lived in London and worked for different agencies like LiveWork and IDN. And with the pandemic, I decided to move back to Italy, of course, for the pizza, but also because I wanted to work more intentionally as a service designer. And so I really dedicate now my time to helping individuals and organizations become resilient and adaptable in a changing world. And that sounds abstract, and I'm going to make this more concrete. So I do that in two ways. One, as a freelance consultant. And so I choose like companies that have a focus on helping people become more resilient or adaptable. But once I started having conversation with the existing clients and potential clients, one thing that came up over and over again is that they didn't understand why they should care about resilience, because they didn't understand what it would mean for them personally. And if I looked at all the areas of our life, so work, finances, community, and family, the number one key factor is how we make a living. And that actually working for yourself would be the most resilient option, because you have full control and agency over what you do, who you're working for, how much time you're spending. But somehow we perceive being as a freelancer the kind of uncertain and unsafe option. And that's a bit the journey that led me to creating IMMA, which is this collective that just helps freelancers or aspiring like freelancers in the social and climate space. But I'm not going to talk about this because most of you are working within organizations and with organizations. And so I want to share a bit more of how designing for resilience looks like. But before, I need to give you a little bit of context. So why do we need to design for resilience? It's because whoever you are and wherever you live and whatever you care about, everything has already been affected by the climate crisis. And so we actually need to start talking about something that is called climate adaptation. And please type no +1 in the chat if you know about climate adaptation, and -1 if you don't know. And there are no brownie points for knowing it or not knowing, because I want to explain it to you. What is the difference with an analogy? So imagine you're on this tiny boat in the middle of the lake, and because you're really shitty at rowing, you smashed against a rock. And now you have a leak in your boat and water is pouring in, and you actually need to move, to take quick action. And the first thing you do is actually finding something to seal the leak so that you stop from sinking. And that is actually called mitigation, because it addresses the root cause of the problem. And once you seal the leak, the next thing you do is you try and grab a bucket or anything else and start pouring out the water from your boat so that you can stay afloat. And that action we call adaptation, because it addresses the effects. And so if we take this analogy into the climate crisis, all the initiatives that you see that are addressing climate, reducing emissions and getting us to net zero are part of a mitigation strategy. And everything that deals with the consequences is part of adaptation. Sometimes they can work together and sometimes they don't. But the thing is, why didn't we speak so much about adaptation? It's because we, as developed countries, we have been the biggest emitters. So our first #1 priority was reducing emissions. But unfortunately, we got to a point where we can't just focus on that. We need to start focusing on adaptation. And specifically today, a report came out for the UK that just show how woefully inadequate are our measures and progress on adaptation. So I want to break this down and make it even more concrete for a service designer. So think about Karima, and Karima is a woman, and she lives in London, and she wants to take some climate action on mitigation. And so when it comes to her home, she might want to lower her emissions and change to a renewable energy provider, just as Joshua did. And she might take her job to actually contribute to net zero. Or she might choose a bank or pension provider that invests sustainably and ethically. And the emotion that she might want to deal with are shame and guilt when she could make more sustainable choice, but she doesn't. And if we look at how Karima would actually, what services she would need if she would want to take climate adaptation action, that changes quite a bit. Because then she might want to consider how she can prepare her home for extreme weather events. Think about the heat waves last year in London and how that created some cracks in the roofs and more leaks. She might want to think about how she can diversify her income streams and invest in her personal development or get a side hustle. When it comes to her finances, she probably wants to have an emergency fund so that she's prepared for any financial shocks. And the emotions that she needs to deal with is probably fear and grief for what is lost and will be lost. And this is just adaptation in the global north. But let's imagine for a second that Karima would live in Pakistan, which has been affected by severe floods last year. And so Karima would actually need to deal with the consequences of those floods and need to consider if she wants to rebuild her home or move to a safer place. She probably needs to find ways of making a living and finding the money that she can pay for what the minimum that she needs. And what she probably faces is an existential fear and worry of how she can survive. And so, as you can see, we need to design very different services for those three different scenarios. And while we might not be able to avoid all climate impacts, we can definitely design how we prepare and adapt for them. And Claire Osborne said a really wonderful thing. She said, it has never been more important to have capable, caring people in a position to make a difference. And I think as designers, we actually have the skill set and we have the capacity to make that difference. And so let's look a bit more into how we can design for resilience. But before that, I want to explain what I mean when I say resilience. So resilience is defined as the capacity to face any shocks and rebound from them. Think of it as a rubber band. We stretch under adversity and under stress, and then we go back to our natural shape. But actually, I prefer the concept of anti-fragility. There is the book Anti-Fragile from Nassim Taleb. And actually, this concept comes much more from nature. And many things in nature are anti-fragile. Think about trees. Trees actually need storms to blow off the old leaves and to break the weak branches so that the tree can grow stronger. Or think about vaccines. They inject a little bit of the virus so that our immune system responds and becomes stronger and can fight the virus when it encounters. So actually, how can we design things that have these principles at the heart? And so let's look maybe even more concretely in what this means for our design practice. And I like this diagram that is inspired by one of Liv's work, where we looked at, as the service designers, we often improve existing services or we design something completely from scratch. And we have also other two dimensions, the front end, where we look at how those services are delivered to the people in the market, and also the back end, how we design the processes and business models that actually deliver those services. So we all know that we need a lot of skills, and we can actually use those. And I'm going to explain you and give you 4 examples of how we can design resilience in each of those dimensions. There are more principles and ideas, but for the sake of time, I'll just give you one. So when it comes to making an existing service more resilient, one thing that we already know how to do and probably need to do more is identifying and designing for unhappy paths. So as disruptions are becoming more frequent, we can have a simple workshop. I like sometimes to use just a 90-minute workshop because sometimes this feels like a big chore, but it opens the conversation. A bit similar to what Lara was saying, like you need to start small and with small actions. So I just take them through and say, how would users actually access this service if there is no electricity? What can we provide? And that gets them thinking about actually what can we offer and what are the potential impacts and solutions that will come up. And so this is just a simple way of how we actually can think about those things. Of course, you can develop more like elaborate scenarios. When it comes to designing for new services that contribute to resilience, it's actually about designing for prevention. And the more I design for resilience, I more actually can see parallels to healthcare or finance. Because, for example, I worked on a brief where we looked at how can we support elderly people be better prepared for extreme weather events. And when we interviewed them, many elderly people said, yeah, they don't believe in climate change, one. And some actually said, yeah, I lived a long and happy life. If something bad happens, that's meant to be. I'm happy if I die, like no problem at all. And so what we understood by this is actually we didn't need to design for the elderly, but we needed to design for those who care about the elderly. And so again, one of the things that I find very useful is looking at behavioral design to understand and uncover the biases that are at play and how can we use maybe nudging people into actually acting and doing the things that are right. Because the hardest challenge in this space is actually designing for what people don't want, but actually need. When it comes to the organization and how can we increase the adaptive capacities, when I look at adaptive capacities as a service designer, we're really well positioned to help people because it's all about iterative experimentation and it's collaboration and getting people together. And I worked on a project with a group of manufacturing companies, and they were really struggling with the fast-paced change that they were seeing in the market. And the CEO asked, can you design a program and a safe space where people can learn how to experiment and be much more proactive in proposing new solutions? And so we did what you would do, like the classical thing of teaching them to start with a problem, actually rapid prototyping and implementing. And that's the traditional thing. But one thing that I discovered, what we didn't put so much attention in, what I would do the next time is we build really good swimmers, but we weren't very attentive to building a swimming pool for them. Because when you need to build those adaptive capacity, the biggest shift is in shifting the power dynamics in who makes the decisions. And so when they then basically came back from this program in the organization, it was still very hierarchical and people were telling them what to do. And so you didn't have like that adaptive capacity. Maybe they will have it, but yeah, I just realized that, helping shift those power dynamics is the number one key thing that I would focus on the next time. And when it comes to the last but not least, in the fourth dimension, really designing new resilient business models is because one strategy of anti-fragility or resilience is differentiation. So it's helping organizations think about alternative and new services. And to make them even more resilient, you probably want to think about partnerships and collaboration. An example, Disney is a very anti-fragile company because it has many service offerings like movies, theme parks, streaming service that all reinforce each other and help in each other and create synergies. And how can we support this as service designers? We know how to map complex ecosystems and visualize them and visualize the relationships among those partnerships and collaborations. So we can help facilitate those conversations that other disciplines might not be so familiar and used to. So, though, as you can see, there is plenty of room of how you can use the skills that you already have as a service designer to help designing for more resilience. But why aren't we then designing for adaptation so much? Why isn't there so much work in this space? And by just discovering, I found 3 hurdles, and one of them is a secret ingredient. So the first hurdle is that there is a lack of awareness. Not many people are knowing about adaptation or the climate risk. And in a recent study, PwC found that only 40% of CEOs have considered climate risks in their risk strategies. So that's not even half of them. And the second thing is its attractiveness. So when you need to make the business case for climate adaptation, you can't really argue with how much the return will be. Usually, it's much more about what are the losses you avoid. And avoiding losses is not that sexy as how much money you can make in this capitalistic society. And the third is, and that's the secret ingredient, it's actually about emotions and the emotions that we have attached to the climate crisis. Because what I see more and more is that how we feel about the climate crisis matters as much as what we do. And so whenever I design for resilience, the first opening act of any project will be carving out space to surface and process and acknowledge the emotions that come up with it. Because, and I can share it later in the chat, there is a wonderful episode from Dr. Kriti Kamko, and she says, give people the space where they can allow themselves to feel. Grief is real, grief is natural, and we have an obligation to feel it fully. Otherwise, we are going to take shallow actions, but what is being called for is deeper, and we don't get to deeper action if we're not facing our grief. And what I find the reality is that things are worse than we recognize and better than we imagine, because we often don't think about how things could be, because the new version of climate denial is climate doomerism. And so we shouldn't fall into that. And we should remind ourselves, as Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, it's the only way it ever happened. And I want to leave you with this message of hope and say thank you for listening. And yeah, let's keep connected and continue this conversation.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was really, really good. Yeah, I really like the analogy, like how you combine with both, because I believe that helps us understand as an audience to understand more about what your concept is. And then speaking of how actually us service designers already got the skill, but then you also point out the secret ingredients. Why is it not enough of that in the world right now? And very impressive how you're comparing about like there's different scenarios in global north and global south, with where I'm from as well. I experiencing both. I can kind of understand when you pointed out how they are very different. Yeah, and yeah, thank you so much. And now the time for questions. So the question for you, oh, there's so many hearts for you right now. Yeah, so when do you decide that you want to design for resilience? That was
It was actually, I also wrote about it. It was very hard. I for a long time, focused much more on sustainability and social impact, and somehow it never felt right for me. There was always a lot of vision, and I always had this fear of greenwashing. And I was really drawn to all the extreme weather events and disasters. And I actually needed to probably have quite a few sessions with my therapist and really unpack this to understand, because I was really worried how I would feel about diving and spending so much time in studying so much suffering. But one of the things that I can say now, after having done this almost for 2 years, I feel every day so appreciative about the small things in life. I feel so grateful that I would never go back, because it's just you get a different dimension of like what you're experiencing right now and what it means to feel safe in your bed, to have a warm shower, and you have your morning coffee.
Wow. Great answer. So I got a message from Joshua. He said, I would have a question in case no one else does. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. I thought probably you've heard enough of me, but I was curious. Thank you so much, Lilli. By the way, I've been working with Lilli in a recent project, and in terms of like resilience, she is like living it for sure. I have lots, yeah, everyone has lots to learn from her. I had a quick question because I just discovered about this anti-fragility concept from you, and I'm curious because also in nature things die, they, you know, get digested by the earth and, you know, reused, and I'm wondering about whether there's kind of that balance to strike also when you consider organizations, about like whether to make it like super resilient and kind of like a cockroach or whatever, it just keeps like coming back, versus just allowing it to die. And I was like thinking about, there's this COVID tracking app which called Luca, which is like trying to re-identify itself and trying to change to, you know, now the context has changed. And I'm wondering whether this is like, should it just die because there's not as much purpose for it anymore, versus like change and differentiate, as you say. So I was just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Yes, I think I'm also a bit torn between this. I absolutely can. I think it's about designing also like to let go of things. If you think Tencent, no, it's a Chinese company, and it or like there is a group of it, and they actually have like 120 small companies within, and they really fiercely compete. But I don't think that actually competition is the way forward. I rather think about co-petition and how you create networks and help each other. But I actually absolutely believe that, no, that we should also consider how can we let things go or let them evolve. Like usually things simplify and break down, and that is a strategy. And another strategy in the book, the anti-fragility, is called looking not at the future, but looking at the past. So the Lilli effect. If you want to create something that is resilient, look at things that have existed forever. Like if you think about the chair always, like it didn't have that much innovation, like it didn't change so much in those hundreds of years. It might look same, it has the similar function. So, but some things are changing. So again, yeah, I think we can definitely should learn how to let go and how to close things, because we all don't live forever. And at the same time, we can also take inspiration from things that have been around for a long, long time.
That feels like an absolutely beautiful place to start wrapping up with that wisdom. People who still have questions, if you want to put them in the side chat, I'm sure that speakers could quickly have a sift through. And also I think people shared their details as we were going along. So thank you, massive thank you to everyone who joined us this evening, and to our amazing speakers, Lara, Joshua, Lilli. to give a very quick highlights of what I absolutely loved. From Lara, we heard about actually sifting through Southwark's climate plans and understanding there's actually 150 actions that they said they would deliver, and understanding those as themes, and feeding that back to them. And we also heard about critical service design, reframing local government objectives, world building, preferable futures, and then backcasting, which I think was a really beautiful idea. Joshua shared with us some really interesting things, including the idea of regenerative farming being like a nice outlet for when you're doing more high level work, then you can also come back and be doing stuff like with the soil, which I think I get that urge too, and I think that's really, really satisfying. And also talked about all the different kind of journeys that he's been on and lowering his personal carbon footprint, and also a huge amount of different resources that have been shared. And then Lilli, awesome, talked about climate adaptation, resilience, anti-fragility, and about how we feel about the climate crisis mattering as much as what we do. And I know I sometimes get into the climate doom mindset, so it was amazing to hear about so much hope and so much positivity around the climate from all of our amazing speakers. So yeah, just massive thank you to everybody involved. And in terms of if you want to be a speaker or you want to suggest a topic or you have any feedback, then we are very open to that. We'll be sending around a thank you email, and there'll be an opportunity to give feedback. If you've got any announcements, stick them in the side chat if you're hiring or you're looking support or you're looking for work. This event, the recording of this event, will be up in YouTube, on YouTube in the next few weeks. And we look forward to seeing you at our next event. So have a lovely evening, stay green, stay service designing, and thank you so much.